Welcome back to Spotlight Murders by Skoob. I'm your host, Kieran Caldwell, and today we're pulling back the velvet curtain on a case that still echoes through the halls of Hollywood like a ghostly whisper. This isn't just a story about murder. It's about glamour, control, and the price of becoming a star in a world built to devour innocence. Her name was Dorothy Stratten, a small-town girl with golden hair, striking beauty, and a quiet charm that turned heads the moment she walked into a room. She was Playboy's rising star, the next big thing. But before she could truly shine, her light was extinguished in the most brutal, intimate way imaginable. What you're about to hear is more than a true crime story. It's a tale of manipulation hiding behind love, of obsession disguised as protection. It's about how the people closest to us can sometimes be the most dangerous. And it forces us to confront a hard truth, that fame, especially for young women, often comes with a terrifying cost. We'll follow Dorothy's path, from a Dairy Queen in Vancouver to the glittering stages of Los Angeles, from the arms of a controlling husband to the promise of a breakout film career, and ultimately to the scene of a crime so horrific it shocked even the most jaded corners of Hollywood. This is the murder of Dorothy Stratten. And it's not just a tragedy, it's a warning. Stay with us. Because in the land of stars, sometimes the shadows tell the real story. Dorothy Ruth Stratten wasn't born for stardom, at least not in any obvious way. Picture this: a shy teenager in Vancouver, working part-time shifts at Dairy Queen to help her single mother pay the bills. Her father had abandoned the family when she was young, leaving her mother to raise Dorothy and her siblings through grueling work as a housekeeper. At 14, Dorothy was already shouldering adult responsibilities, flipping burgers and serving ice cream in a tough neighborhood. She'd never even been on an airplane. This was her world, small, predictable, safe. But nature had other plans for Dorothy Stratten. Her Dutch heritage had blessed her with striking features that couldn't be hidden behind a Dairy Queen uniform. Platinum blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you, and cheekbones that could cut glass. She was tall, graceful, with a natural elegance that made people stop and stare. During her senior year of high school, everything changed. That's when she met Paul Snider. Now, Paul Snider was everything Dorothy wasn't. Where she was humble and unassuming, he was flashy and boastful. Where she worked honestly for every dollar, he hustled his way through life with questionable schemes. This small-time operator had his fingers in pimping, car show promotions, and likely drug dealing. He wore his sleeves like cologne, thick and impossible to ignore. But Snider had a talent for reading people, and when he looked at Dorothy, he didn't see a shy Dairy Queen worker. He saw dollar signs, he saw opportunity, he saw his ticket to the big time. The courtship was textbook manipulation, expensive gifts for a girl who'd never owned anything valuable, grand stories about his success, and connections for someone who'd never left her neighborhood, promises of a modeling career for a girl who'd never imagined herself as anything more than ordinary. And Dorothy, starved for affection and dazzled by possibilities she'd never dreamed of, fell for every word. Summer of 1978. Snider had convinced Dorothy to audition for something called Playboy's Great Playmate Hunt, a contest designed to find the perfect centerfold for the magazine's 25th anniversary issue. For a girl who'd never been photographed professionally, this was like being asked to perform brain surgery. Enter Ken Honey, a Vancouver photographer with experience in discovering playmates. He arranged a test shoot, and what happened next changed everything. The camera loved Dorothy Stratten in a way that defied explanation. Her natural beauty, combined with an almost ethereal vulnerability, created magic on film. Honey sent several photos to Marilyn Grabowski, Playboy's photo editor in Los Angeles. Grabowski's response was swift and decisive. Get this girl to LA immediately. Imagine being Dorothy in that moment. You're 18 years old, you've never left Vancouver, and suddenly you're boarding a plane to Los Angeles, alone, to stay at the legendary Playboy Mansion, the same mansion where Hugh Hefner entertained celebrities and power brokers, where fortunes were made and dreams either came true or died spectacular deaths. Dorothy stayed in the mansion's guest house for several days, and it was like stepping into another universe. The grandeur, the celebrities casually walking around, the sense that anything was possible. It was overwhelming for someone whose biggest aspiration had been making it through high school. But here's what made Dorothy special. Despite being completely out of her element, her warmth and natural charm won people over. She wasn't trying to be something she wasn't. She was genuinely sweet, genuinely grateful, genuinely herself. In a world full of calculated personas, authenticity stood out like a beacon. The professional photo shoot with legendary glamour photographer Mario Casilli went better than anyone expected. Grabowski assured Dorothy that a Playmate feature was practically guaranteed. Dorothy returned briefly to Vancouver, quit her job at Dairy Queen, and prepared to relocate permanently to Los Angeles. But even as her star was rising, the seeds of tragedy were already being planted. Snider's behavior was becoming increasingly possessive and controlling. He was constantly calling Dorothy and the people involved in her shoots. When her photographers arrived at the airport, they were met by Snider in a rented limousine, greeting them with a sharp, "You guys take the cab." The message was clear. I control Dorothy Stratten. Everything goes through me. By December 1978, Dorothy had moved into a small Westwood apartment with Snider. She was working grueling shifts at the Los Angeles Playboy Club as a bunny while pursuing acting lessons. Meanwhile, Snider spent his days sleeping late and watching television, living entirely off Dorothy's earnings. This was when Molly Bachelor entered the picture. Molly moved in with Dorothy and Snider, and what she witnessed over the next year was disturbing. Dorothy was constantly looking for excuses to leave the apartment and avoid Snider. She would invite Molly to accompany her to the Playboy Mansion for activities, pinball games, dinner, movies, swimming, anything to escape the oppressive presence of her husband. Dorothy never went to the mansion alone. This wasn't just preference, it was protection. She had confided to Molly that several women at the mansion had made advances toward her, making solo visits uncomfortable. But more importantly, she was trying to hide these trips from Snider, who would have insisted on accompanying her. Think about that for a moment. Dorothy was using the Playboy Mansion, a symbol of ultimate freedom and hedonism, as a refuge from her own home. She was trapped in what Molly recognized as a relentless cycle with no apparent escape. During this time, Dorothy rarely voiced her complaints directly, but Molly could see the cracks. Dorothy had expressed self-resentment for agreeing to pose for Playboy. After her nude photos were published, she faced numerous rejections while trying to secure regular modeling work. The very thing that was supposed to liberate her was limiting her opportunities. When Molly asked Dorothy why she stayed with Paul despite her obvious unhappiness, Dorothy struggled to articulate her reasons. She felt a sense of obligation toward him, a sentiment that Molly found baffling, since it was clear that Snider was living off Dorothy's earnings. But Dorothy had been psychologically programmed to feel guilty. Snider constantly reminded her that he had discovered her, that she owed her success to him, that she was nothing without his guidance. This is classic abuser behavior: create dependency, then exploit it. Snider also used information strategically. There had been an incident with Hugh Hefner that Dorothy found uncomfortable, and Snider leveraged this knowledge to make her feel indebted to him for protecting her, even though his protection was really about maintaining control. After almost a year of witnessing this toxic dynamic, Molly decided she'd had enough. She moved out, tired of Snider and the overall situation. She could see what Dorothy couldn't yet admit to herself: that she was trapped with a man who viewed her not as a person, but as property. By June 1979, Snider's continuous pressure had worn Dorothy down. They were married in Las Vegas, a quick, impersonal ceremony that should have been the happiest day of Dorothy's life, but felt more like a business transaction. In a telling conversation with Marilyn Grabowski, Dorothy revealed her true feelings. "I owe it to him. I was a nobody when he found me." These words haunt me every time I think about them. Here was a young woman who had achieved something extraordinary, yet she credited her abuser with her success. But Dorothy's career was genuinely taking off. She became the Playmate of the Month for August 1979, then the 1980 Playmate of the Year. She signed with an agent and secured film and television roles, including a prominent appearance on the Playboy Roller Disco and Pajama Party in October 1979. Most significantly, she landed the leading role in Galaxina, a science fiction satire where she played a captivating robot character capable of love, a role that would prove tragically prophetic. Meanwhile, the divide between Dorothy's success and Snider's failure was becoming impossible to ignore. Within the walls of the Playboy Mansion, the contrast was stark. Hefner and his associates adored Dorothy. She was genuine, sweet, and represented the best of what Playboy claimed to celebrate. Snider, with his garish dress and crude mannerisms, was generally regarded with disdain. Hugh Hefner, in particular, developed a strong aversion to Snider. He had background checks conducted through Vancouver police and cautioned Dorothy against rushing into marriage. He even restricted Snider's access to the Playboy Mansion unless Dorothy was with him. Hefner correctly perceived Snider as a detrimental force in Dorothy's life, but his warnings fell on deaf ears. Snider's attempts to capitalize on Dorothy's fame were pathetic and exploitative. He tried to market her through a roller skating poster and perfume line, both of which failed miserably. He seized control of her earnings, using her money to buy himself a Mercedes while leaving Dorothy with a 1967 Mercury Cougar. But Dorothy was learning. She took charge of her finances by hiring Robert Houston and forming Dorothy Stratten Enterprises, ensuring her earnings went into an account only she could access. A modest joint account was created to provide Snider with a monthly allowance, essentially putting him on an allowance funded by his wife's work. This newfound independence sparked Snider's rage. He would lash out at Dorothy, berating her for asserting control over her own money. In his mind, he had created Dorothy Stratten, and therefore everything she earned belonged to him. Enter Peter Bogdanovich, acclaimed Hollywood director, the man behind classics like The Last Picture Show and Paper Moon. In early 1980, he cast Dorothy in his new film, They All Laughed, which would star alongside legendary actors like Audrey Hepburn, Ben Gazzara, and John Ritter. For Dorothy, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. Not just another modeling gig or cheesy TV appearance, but a legitimate film with A-list talent and a respected director. It represented her entry into Hollywood's elite echelon. The filming took place in New York, and for the first time in years, Dorothy was away from Snider's constant supervision. She could breathe, she could be herself. And in that freedom, something beautiful happened. She fell in love with Bogdanovich. Their relationship developed naturally during filming. Here was a man who respected Dorothy's intelligence, who valued her opinions, who saw her as more than just a beautiful object. Bogdanovich was everything Snider wasn't: cultured, successful, genuinely caring about Dorothy as a person. They managed to keep their relationship discreet, away from media scrutiny. But Snider's paranoia meant he called Dorothy nightly, filled with suspicion and probing questions. Dorothy's responses became stilted, evasive. When he said, "I love you," she couldn't bring herself to say it back. The contrast couldn't have been starker. During the day, Dorothy was working with Hollywood royalty, being treated as a serious actress, falling in love with a man who respected her. At night, she was fielding interrogation calls from her increasingly unhinged husband. When Dorothy returned to the West Coast, she finally found the courage to confront Snider with the truth. She was in love with Bogdanovich. She wanted an amicable divorce. She offered him a settlement of $7,500, generous considering their short marriage and the fact that all the money was hers anyway. Snider scoffed at the offer. In his mind, Dorothy was his creation, his property. How dare she try to leave him? How dare she fall in love with someone else? His ego couldn't bear the rejection. Dorothy was resolute. She would be living separately from now on. She moved in with Bogdanovich at his Beverly Hills home. Snider's response was predictably toxic. He hired a private investigator to shadow Dorothy and collect evidence for the divorce proceedings. He boasted defiantly about reclaiming his wife, asserting that he had orchestrated her entire career and transformed her into a symbol of allure. But privately, Snider knew he had lost Dorothy forever. His dreams of economic gain through her success had been shattered, and in his twisted mind, there was only one person to blame: Dorothy herself. Paul Snider's obsession shifted from trying to win Dorothy back to punishing her for what he saw as her betrayal. In his mind, Dorothy had ruined his life. She was the architect of his personal and financial ruin. She had to pay. On August 14th, 1980, Snider contacted Dorothy and arranged a meeting at the West Los Angeles bungalow where he was living with two roommates. He promised to finalize their divorce proceedings in a calm, civilized manner. Dorothy, ever trusting and hoping for an amicable resolution, agreed to come. What Dorothy didn't know was that Snider had already purchased a 12-gauge Mossberg shotgun. This wasn't about reconciliation or even negotiation. This was about revenge. When Dorothy arrived at the bungalow that Thursday afternoon, she walked into a trap that had been months in the making. The exact details of what happened next are horrific and heartbreaking. Snider sexually assaulted Dorothy before shooting her point blank with the shotgun. Then, in a final act of cowardice, he turned the gun on himself. Dorothy Stratten, just 20 years old, died in that cramped bungalow room. Her dreams of Hollywood stardom, her hopes for a life free from manipulation and control, her love affair with Bogdanovich, all of it ended in a moment of ultimate male violence. The news sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. Headlines like "Playmate of Year Slain" dominated newspapers nationwide. The story had everything the media loved: sex, glamour, celebrity, and violent death. Dorothy's final film, Galaxina, premiered just weeks after her murder. Audiences watched her portray a robot capable of love, not knowing they were seeing a woman who had died trying to escape a loveless marriage. Hugh Hefner's response to Dorothy's murder revealed much about the man and his empire. He immediately directed his staff and other playmates not to communicate with the media about Dorothy. He himself refrained from discussing her death even privately. Most tellingly, he was particularly keen on avoiding any publicity concerning his relationship with Dorothy's husband, Paul Snider. This silence raises uncomfortable questions. Why was Hefner so concerned about his connection to Snider being exposed? The truth is, Snider had been given unusual access to the Playboy Mansion. While the mansion typically had a policy against admitting boyfriends or husbands, Snider was a noticeable exception. Hefner had even allowed him to bring other women to the mansion. Was this part of some twisted game? Did Hefner maintain a friendly relationship with Snider as part of a strategy to eventually win Dorothy for himself? The timing of Snider's banishment from the mansion, just a few months before the murder, suggests that Hefner may have been playing a longer game than anyone realized. Critics accused Playboy of treating Dorothy as a mere asset rather than a human being. They argued that the exploitative culture within the brand allowed predators like Snider to thrive. Feminists challenged Hefner and Playboy for nurturing environments that reduced women to objects of male consumption. The most devastating critique came from Teresa Carpenter, whose article, Death of a Playmate in the Village Voice, won the Pulitzer Prize for feature writing in 1981. Carpenter's investigation was damning in its scope and conclusions. She argued that while Snider pulled the trigger, Hefner, Bogdanovich, and Snider were all complicit in using Dorothy for their personal aims. Each man saw Dorothy differently. Snider saw a meal ticket. Bogdanovich saw a muse and lover. Hefner saw a corporate treasure, but none of them saw her as a complete human being deserving of protection and respect. Carpenter depicted Dorothy as a victim of what she called the Playboy philosophy. the dangerous belief that women exist primarily for male consumption and control. Snider, she argued, was a tragic product of this philosophy, consumed by the belief that women were possessions to be owned and controlled. As I researched this story, I kept coming back to one haunting detail: Dorothy's own words about her relationship with Snider. She had written a poem that revealed her deep ambivalence. "When storms are past and gone, shall gentle love succeed. I wish to ease a troubled mind. Sleep is the thing we need. With these few words I send my love. You will in this a question find. My question is without a doubt. Love is the question. Find it out." These weren't the words of a woman plotting to leave her husband for money or fame. These were the words of someone desperately trying to find love and peace in a relationship that offered neither. Dorothy was pleading for understanding, hoping for resolution, searching for genuine love in a dynamic built on manipulation and control. The tragedy of Dorothy Stratten isn't just that she died young. It's that she died before she could fully realize who she was outside of other people's expectations and demands. She went from being Paul Snider's discovery to Hugh Hefner's playmate to Peter Bogdanovich's muse. But who was Dorothy Stratten when no one was watching? What would she have become if she'd been allowed to define herself? We'll never know, because the men in her life, even those who claimed to love her, never gave her that chance. They saw her beauty, her potential, her star quality, but they never saw her humanity clearly enough to protect it. That's our deep dive into the life and loss of Dorothy Stratten, a woman whose beauty opened doors, but also invited danger. From a Dairy Queen counter in Vancouver to the pages of Playboy and the edge of stardom, we've followed her journey through fame, control, and ultimately, a fatal act of violence. But this story isn't just about one woman, it's about a system. Dorothy's death wasn't only the result of Paul Snider's possessiveness or jealousy. It was the result of a culture that too often views women as trophies, as objects to be owned, shaped, and discarded. A culture that masks exploitation with glamour and excuses predatory behavior as ambition. Hugh Hefner said he gave women power, but when Dorothy needed protection, he gave her silence. And Peter Bogdanovich, who may have loved her, still played a role in the same power dynamics that trapped her from the start. Dorothy never got the freedom she deserved, but her story challenges us to ask harder questions. How many Dorothys are still out there, discovered young, exploited quietly, and discarded violently? How often do we mistake control for love and ambition for opportunity? The truth is, Dorothy Stratten's story is not just a tragedy, it's a mirror, a reflection of what happens when we value beauty more than humanity and allow the powerful to act without consequence. To hear more about the toxic systems that contributed to Dorothy's death and the dark legacy of the industries that enabled it, head to the Skoob app for the extended episode. You'll find interviews, deeper analysis, and the full story of how Hollywood still hasn't learned its lesson. Download Skoob today on the App Store or Play Store. I'm your host, Kieran Caldwell. Thanks for walking with me through this haunting story. And remember, sometimes the real crime isn't what happens in the shadows. It's what we ignore in the spotlight.